Hello everyone, I am MTOV Peiris from Sri Lanka and I'm currently a PhD student at the University of Hong Kong, and my PhD study is about assessing urban flood resilience using the dynamic interactions, and my case study is Colombo city, which is frequently affected by the floods with the monsoon rains in the commercial capital of Sri Lanka. So cities are vital components for the urban growth or the economy of any country. And then from the urban planning perspective, floods can be one of the disasters that seriously affect the community livelihood and also disrupt the economic activity of cities. So in that sense, the conventional methods of flood mitigation and also the adaptation activities have not given proper due recognition of the dynamic nature of the flood event, especially using the before, during a flood event, and also after the recovery process as well. So my research question is about asking how to assess the dynamic interactions using the structural and functional factors, especially during a flood event. So based on that, my literature review studied shows that the resilience has been analyzed from different perspectives, where the system interactions or the dynamic activities were not considered significantly in the past research. So I focused on for the system dynamic framework to assess how this resilience or the recovery process, so how soon the communities can get back to their normal livelihood during a disaster, and to assess that and show what factors, what parameters critically affect the community's livelihood or the interactions during a flood event. So in my system dynamics framework, I have used the natural, physical, and human components together, and to show the interactions among these three components are the main the process during a flood disaster, and how this disaster becomes a fundamental factor for the community's livelihood during and even after this flood event. So if I directly move into my model structure, especially from the system dynamics perspective, I have focused on the goal of keeping or maintaining the critical functions of a city during a flood event. That is the main goal from the urban planning perspective. And then the gap that I have identified is the damage to infrastructure, especially to the roads, the water infrastructure, and also the energy and electricity infrastructure are the main disruptions during a disaster. And also the roads are vital for the recovery services and also to maintain the material and the relief services without disruption during this event. So in my measurements, I have identified these operational activities, especially to keep the healthcare, the food, energy, and also the transport services to manage those things to the flood waters should be removed as soon as possible. So my objective for my dynamic framework has been developed as this inundation of roads on average is about 3 days or 72 hours, and then the planning agencies needs to reduce this to at least to 8 to 12 hours of time. So the activities, the normal activities can be shaped back into the normal, and we can keep the damage to minimum during this period. So to manage these problems, the agencies have already proposed the pumping stations and relocations and also essential food item stocks. However, in my reference modes, I have identified the population inflow in the floodplain is one of the critical factor from the last 20 years, and also the cost factor for the government to damage recovery and also to provide relief services during a disaster is another issue that we face as the planning agencies, and also to manage these things, the road inundation has to be managed within as short a period as possible. To manage that, I have developed a stock and flow diagram together with the coastal route diagram, and this shows how this population vulnerability and then the floodwater variation, and also the government expenditure shaping the communities about the flood event during a disaster period. And I wanted to take insight from that as critical parameters where these vulnerable communities, how soon we can take them out of these locations and also allow them to come back to the normal activities by removing the flood waters as soon as possible. At the same time, the concentration of these flood waters can cause secondary issues, secondary problems such as the epidemics and also other problems for the vulnerable communities. So the floodwater removal is one of the vital components that we have to consider from the planning perspective. At the same time, to minimize the expenditure, we have to manage that beforehand, even before the flood event occurs, and how that can be, the budgets can be managed during a flood disasters while keeping the essential services intact and minimizing the burden to the government as well. So with this, I will conclude my presentation, and I would like to obtain a view, especially from making future scenarios for the future flood events and what factors that we can minimize or manage to create effective flood resilience, and then how these mitigation and adaptation measures can support these activities to improve the resilience of these communities, and also how the stock and flow diagrams can vary or can manage this complexity during these dynamic interactions, and then propose a win-win situation for the governments and also the policymakers along with the communities that are living in these vulnerable areas. Thank you very much, and welcome all your suggestions and the comments.